In light of the hunger problem here on the shore, where 1 child in 5 go to bed hungry, where do you stand on the subject of food stamps?
The U.S. Government pays out millions and millions of dollars in food stamp programs, WIC, independent cards. Oftentimes, those programs are under scrutiny because they are being abused by people, recipients that don't need to be on it, shouldn't be on it. What I would like to do, instead of having all these individuals that are in their welfare program constantly having their own independence to spend at will, because the different programs are showing that in some cases, last year it was shown, I believe it was CNN or one of them, one of the different reporting networks, it talked about individuals spending it on alcohol, spending it on cigarettes, different stuff other than the sustenance of food for their children. So what I would like to do is have more or less take those type of independent cards, WIC cards, food stamp programs away from the individuals. And what we do is invest in local, regionalized food banks, different soup kitchens, stuff of that nature, where we can guarantee that the funding that is going toward those programs is going to be available to them and it will be utilized by them. They'll have food services and hot meals ready for them, and then they still have the option to take, at the food bank, to take food home with them rather than giving them the freedom to spend at will.
Well, what's common sense? We got just about, the last numbers I was getting was we got 66 million illegals running around the United States, and we're feeding. So we need to clean up our immigration first. And then secondly, I can't believe that they're going to bring in these Syrian refugees, especially without even being vetted first. How about taking care of us Americans first? Because that's what I stand for, us Americans first. We're rebuilding other countries, and we can't feed our own? Is this ridiculous? Come on. I mean, where's the common sense in Washington? It's like they forgot about us Americans. You know, this has got to stop. You know, look at the money we're spending on all these, the foreigners that are coming in illegally in this country. It's ridiculous. And the court times and how much we pay all these attorneys to take care of all the illegal immigration because ICE is not doing their job. We got an administration who just really doesn't care about us Americans. So, if you want my opinion, I'm for us Americans first. And we shouldn't have hungry children running around America, you know, when we got everybody, anchor babies coming to the United States. They're coming to the United States and visiting the United States and having babies, and next thing you know, they're American citizens. This is ridiculous. This has got to stop. And they're really not American citizens. Thanks.
Here, I grew up very poor. I know what the taste of government cheese was like when you get a big old block when you were a kid. I had the food stamps that you had to go to school to get your lunch with, and it was embarrassing. But you know what I learned is not dependency. I didn't learn that I was entitled. I learned that when I was 12 years old, if I wanted something, I had to go out and shine shoes, to sell newspapers, to get money, to be able to feed my family. As I told you, my mother was disabled, she worked. No child should go hungry on the Eastern Shore. We need to take care of them. Where we go wrong is making people dependent upon those things. We need to be able to get them trained to be a new job if they can't do their own job, and to get them employed so that they can earn. I don't have a problem taking care of people who are unable to care for themselves. I have a problem making people dependent on receiving things from the state. Now, when I was in the Marine Corps, I also had a roofing job. You know, when I was in college, I worked midnight to 8, so I could then go to school during the days. There's nothing wrong with learning how to work hard and to be able to earn what you get. And so if we have children on the Eastern Shore that don't have, then we need in the 1st District to take care of those children. But we need to also make sure that their parents have the ability to go out and earn a living. And so we have to make it so that they can get a job that they can support their families on.
Food stamps, I guess it really is the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program, it's SNAP is the new name for it, is really one of the largest growing entitlements in the federal government over the last decade. In fact, it's more than doubled in the amount. It's outpaced Social Security and Medicare in terms of its growth. in large part because in 2008, in the stimulus bill, a lot of the requirements were removed, or restrictions on who could receive food stamps. So we have record numbers. We have over 40 million people in the country. No one is going to deny, no one on this table is going to deny that someone who is hungry, that a hungry child in America shouldn't be fed. But I have voted, some of those 3,600 votes I took were to say that, in return for food stamps, if you're an able-bodied adult, not a child, able-bodied adult, you have to work, train, or seek employment. That should be pretty, again, able-bodied. Not if you have a disability, not if you're a senior, not if you're a child. And that was rejected by the Democrat minority in the House. It was rejected, that idea. We will never, ever, ever pay off our debt and reduce our deficit if we don't do what I think are common sense approaches to programs like that. Make sure the safety net's there. But for heaven's sake, expect an able-bodied adult to work, train, or seek a job in return for using our tax dollars. The second thing is that I teamed up with Dr. Phil Rowe from Tennessee, and we proposed that you put the same restriction on what food you can get in the food stamp program that we do on the Women, Infant, and Children's program, the WIC program. Those of you who are familiar know it has to be highly nutritious food. No junk food, highly nutritious food. We think the same thing should be true if you're using food stamps. You should be going to the store and you're not buying soda pop, you're buying nutritious food with it. We think that makes sense. I still think that makes sense. And that's a tough thing to pull off in Washington, because you do have a lot of vested interest down there who like the food stamp program right now because of the wide variety of things you can obtain with it that are not necessarily nutritious. Thank you.
What is your position on abortion?
I'm a right to life from conception, and that's it.
I have a 100% rating of Maryland Right to Life for every one of the 12 years I've been in the legislature, and I'm proud of it. I'm a Right to Life.
I'm pro-life. Of the people on the stage, I'm the only one who's endorsed by the Maryland Right to Life and by National Right to Life. And I just want to read, because I have 2 minutes here, because one of the people on the stage, you can guess which one, was criticizing my voting record on the Cromnibus as somehow funding abortion. It was something this person said in a town hall, one of these town hall events up in Elton, where he's quoted as saying that I voted to use federal funds to pay for abortion. This is a letter from the National Right to Life Committee. I think they're the authorities on who's pro-life and who's not. They said this charge is utterly false. To put the most charitable interpretation upon Mr. Smeagol's statement, he is grossly misinformed. That's all I'll say. A lot of, again, this is like, those of you who've seen the movie Groundhog Day, this is like the same thing. Each and every time one of these Cromnibus votes comes up, I'm accused of not being pro-life because I vote for a bill that has $1 trillion of funding across the whole entire federal government. Without reminding you that Mr. Smeagol voted for one of Mr. O'Malley's budget, which fully funded sanctuary cities, fully funded Planned Parenthood and Medicaid abortions. I mean, again, I don't play that game, because you deserve the truth about what my voting record is and the thought I put into the votes. The fact of the matter is, I'm pro-life. I'm proud of it. I think human life begins at conception. We're going to do everything we can in this society to protect that, realizing there are difficult situations. Women find themselves in difficult situations sometimes. We have to realize that. But I'm pro-life.
I'm also right to life. I don't believe the government should be funding any type of abortions. I believe that it's a private matter between the woman and her doctor in a private setting in a doctor's office, and the government should not be in that room dictating what they're going to pay for it and work out the finances on it. That, again, the government should not be involved in. Again, I am for right for life.
How do you propose to put Congress back to work?
Well, I put Congress back to work by stopping congressmen who come in here and lie to you. Because the lady who I talked to at CPAC about the right to life and said, how could you possibly give the congressman a 100% vote when he voted on the Omnibus bill to expand the abortion to the Peace Corps workers who never had it before? She said, I didn't read the Omnibus bill. When I asked her how she could possibly give the congressman a 100% vote when he voted to give $4.7 million to Planned Parenthood, she said, we didn't count that bill. When I asked her how, when the congressman stood there with me outside of Planned Parenthood and then said, if you want to sell body parts, it's just fine as long as you don't use government money. I said, do you justify that? She said, I don't want to look at the film. So when the woman stood there and told me from the National Right to Life that she was not going to count his votes, wasn't going to look at his votes, I said, shame on you. I'm going to point you out and call you out, because what you're doing is putting politics ahead of policy, of principle. And so when the congressman sits here and tells you that, go look it up yourself. Everybody's got Google now. You can look at the omnibus bill and you can see what it did. You can see what all of the leading organizations wrote about that. You don't get to say, well, it was important and I had to go ahead and make all these bad votes. You shouldn't count them. And it's not just a omnibus bill. I put that there because you can only put so much space on something. So what I'm going to do about Congress is make sure that the people go down there, don't get to look at you in the eye and tell you one thing and do another and expect you to believe it. It comes from our leaders. We have to tell the truth. You know what? You don't agree with me, I'm going to tell you the truth. And we'll have a discussion as to why I did it. I won't lie, I won't mislead you, and I won't try to do a fancy shuffle so that you can't find out what I really did. Because it's there. Go look it up, and you can go to SmiegelForCongress.com, and you can see the truth. And then ask the congressman to come back and explain why he just told you falsehoods.
Here we go again. I'll read National Right. This is not some person at CPAC. This is dated last month from National Right to Life Committee. Says, Mr. Smiegel's charge, and I'm going to quote it, is utterly false. You all can go to house.gov. There's no secret vote site in Washington. You go to house.gov. You can see what's in these bills. That omnibus bill had 3 new pro-life provisions in it. It also had, oh my gosh, this is like an entire budget bill. It has thousands of things to suggest that if you vote for this bill, you're voting for each and every isolated piece. Is, you all know, you can figure out what that is. Let's talk about how to get Congress right again. What you have to do is you have to pass redistricting reform. This is incredibly important. Now, I testified for the governor's redistricting bill right down the road in Easton, and part of my testimony was that redistricting bill will hurt me. Look, redistricting in the last district made this a more Republican district. It made it more easy for a Republican to win, but it's wrong. Redistricting needs to be done objectively, with attention paid to geographic and jurisdictional boundaries. It makes no sense to have parts of 3 Western Shore counties in this district when you can have 1 and make up the 705,000 people in the district. It makes no sense. What you do when you have redistricting like that is you polarize Congress. Because we spend our time running to the right of each other here. And in the other 7 districts, they spend their time running to the left of each other. And what happens when you get down to Washington? All the moderates are gone. I urge you, and the Democrats in the General Assembly oppose the governor's efforts at redistricting reform. I urge you, contact the General Assembly, tell them next year, I'm sure the governor's going to put it in again next year, put it in until it's passed. Thank you.
Well, I think one thing you're finding here today, which leads to a lot of the arguments over here, is the omnibus bill. We need to have the bills stand on their own merit and own accord. When you start stockpiling all these bills into one big bill with one vote, that's why we have this problem. If we can have each bill independently done, I don't care how long it takes to get it done, you need to get it done. We need to act more timely on our bills if that's going to be the case. But that is the common denominator here of what we need to do. That would be one major issue that I agree that it should be done in DC.
Well, for one, how I bring Congress back together again is one of the first things I do is move the office back into the Cannon building with all the other congressmen. And because you can't talk to other congressmen in the hallways, when they say reach across the aisle, they're literally right across the aisle. You got the Democrats on one side, you got the Republicans on the other side. So I've been in that Cannon buildings. I don't know if y'all have been in there, but you know, everybody's fighting each other, and they're not talking to each other, and nothing's getting done. And I'm sorry, but this Congress has completely disconnected itself with us, the American people. They have health insurance, okay, not like us. They forced Obamacare on us, but they don't have the same health insurance that we have, okay? It's got to stop. Whatever we're forced to have, they should have. Congress is out there, man. They're just not connected with the American people. And I have tried my darndest to even meet with our congressman in the past 3-4 years, and I've not been able to even get a meeting with him. So, you know, talk about disconnected. I'm a constituent, and you know, you got to meet with your people. You got to listen. We're supposed to work for you, the American people. You're supposed to tell us what to do. You know, we look at the bills, review it, summarize it, tell you, and then you tell me how to vote. It's not I'm just going to vote and then just deal with it. You tell me how to vote on these bills.
Without driving up the price of energy. How many of you have a lower energy bill per kilowatt hour? Nobody. It keeps going up because we've actually kneecapped the least expensive, for a while it was least expensive, now natural gas maybe, way to produce energy, which is coal in this country. So it's always a balance. We've got to balance it. And I think this administration honestly has not balanced it because the coal industry has been destroyed in the country. Our energy prices go up. And in the end, scientifically, we don't know if that economic investment is going to yield what we think it will because the modeling is just modeling. It's not scientific evidence, it's scientific models. Thank you.
I believe clearly with the population we got and all the industry we have in the world, we have affected the atmosphere a little bit, but to the level that they say it is, that we're destroying Earth and we're changing the entire temperature, raising the temperature throughout the world, I don't believe so. NOAA has actually dispelled that recently, and I believe that we also have the natural cycle of just temperatures fluctuating over the course of the history of Earth. But one thing we need to do is we need to have EPA involved with our industry so that we can monitor what they're doing and making sure that we're doing the right stuff here in the U.S. But more importantly, I think we need to, as a whole, as a humanitarians and as business industry, work with our allied countries and fellow countries out there to make sure that they're doing the right thing, like China. I mean, we just watched the Olympics a few years ago, and you literally couldn't watch what was going on TV because the smog and was so thick and so bad in those countries that individuals are actually wearing, you know, face masks and stuff like that. All that just from the Earth cycle and wind and everything else, it's all going to find its way around the world and eventually over to this country. So we need to continue to do the right stuff and monitor what we're doing. But again, we need to reach out to the other countries and ensure they're doing their part also.
I mean, the common sense is China, they can't be controlled. We can't tell China what to do. India, we can't tell India what to do. And as far as America, we use aerosols that destroy our ozone layers. We have hot spots, you know, around our oceans that create tsunamis and all these other, you know, atmospheric problems that we have. But the thing is, you know, the common sense thing to do is we can't tell these countries what to do, how to act, but when we deal with them in business, we can persuade them, okay, to start cleaning up their act. And the other thing is I want to talk about is fracking. You know, what are we doing to our well waters? What are we doing to our own United States of America? I think that the government's too hard on the coal industry. I think they're putting all those coal miners out of work. And I mean, there's moderation. Our government always does things too far to the left or too far to the right. There's no moderation. They gotta be a little bit more moderate when they're dealing with these big corporations as far as, you know, how they're doing business, you know, and what they're doing to our waterways and our well waters, you know, and pollutants. So, you know, we have things to do, and there are important things that we can work with, but like I said, moderation. Just don't go too far to the left or to the right.
I think this is a case of everything's been said, but not everybody said it. Unfortunately, I find myself in the inevitable position of agreeing with Congressman Harris. I think he read my notes. I'm just kidding. I do agree with many of the things Congressman Harris said with my position on that, so I won't take up all your time.
Who do you support as the presidential nominee for your party and why?
I support Donald Trump. And the reason I support him, again, he is an individual that is an outsider. He's run his campaign just like me. I'm not someone that's from DC. I'm a grassroots campaign. Obviously, I don't have the billions of dollars he has to fund my own campaign. But again, I don't have no special interest groups supporting me. I don't have lobbyists supporting me. You have an individual that is trying to run on his own accord, and I think it's actually admirable that he has both parties despising him in some ways, because he can't be bought and paid for, so he's going to go in and hopefully do the right things, and that's why I support him.
Donald Trump, and I've looked into his issues. I mean, I'm listening to the issues, and the issues make sense. And I'm looking at the trade issues, the border. We do need a wall. It's out of control. Everything he's saying does make sense. I mean, we're talking the Iranian deal was the worst deal that you can ever imagine. How could Congress let this Iranian deal even pass? I mean, 70% of Americans didn't want that Iranian deal, and it passed anyway. You know, where's the fight? You know, I just don't see the fight in Washington, you know, when things like this happen. But, you know, listen to, you know, I think that Donald Trump is getting a bad rap, and I think he's the best man for the job, and he's not being controlled. And that's what scares me about Washington. A lot of these guys, they're getting PAC money, and they're controlled by these lobbyists.
I was a Rand Paul supporter. I was a Ron Paul delegate to the 2012 in Tampa, and I am going to be a delegate as well as on the ballot to be a congressional candidate this term. And I don't have a name next to me right now. And what I wrote to the League of Women Voters when they asked what you want to put out there is I said, as the parliamentarian in the Maryland House of Delegates and as an attorney who 3 times brought suits against Martin O'Malley when he was governor for things that he did that I consider to be extra constitutional, I want to make sure that the candidates who are in the race now, both Mr. Trump and Mr. Cruz, do not have the election stolen by the establishment Republicans who go down there and decide they're going to do something different. So I'm going down to make sure whoever gets it pursuant to what the rules are and the regulations, and I'll support whoever gets the nomination. Like I said, my person is out of the race, but I'm going to make sure that the party, we put principle ahead of party or politics, and then we make sure that the American people and everybody who participated and worked on behalf of these candidates, one of those candidates is the one who's the nominee of the party.
Some of you may know I endorsed Ben Carson for president, campaigned with him. I've known Ben for 33 years. When he was a senior neurosurgery resident at Hopkins, I was a junior anesthesia resident and worked with him in the operating room, and worked with him in the operating room subsequently while I was at Hopkins. Ben Carson, in my mind, undoubtedly was one of the smartest people up on that stage. Remember, that was a pretty big stage. He is an outsider, there's no question about it. I think that's one of the reasons why his presidential campaign didn't work. He was probably too much of an outsider. He probably was too politically incorrect. He was just a nice guy. I mean, he was one of the guys that nothing nasty ever came out of him, because nastiness doesn't belong in a political campaign. In political campaigns, about thoughts and ideas and about the quality of the person you're voting for. And when I looked at it, I thought that Ben Carson was the choice. So I have to tell you, his name's going to be on the Maryland ballot. I think I'm going to fill in the circle next to Ben Carson. Thank you.
Thank you. So what is your position on a living wage for all workers, wage equality for women, and raising the minimum wage? And would you sponsor and support legislation that required equal pay for women?
Of course I support the equal pay for women. My wife's a biomedical engineer. My daughter's a paramedic for Baltimore County. And I was a single dad growing, you know, for 13 years. I had nothing but girls. You know, I raised nothing but girls. So I was the Mr. Mom, you know. But of course, I support the equal pay for women. And in fact, I have a story, but I don't have enough time to tell this story. It's about a woman who was in Germany who actually invented the brake pad because she stopped at the shoe store. And I mean, not the shoe store, the shoe repair. And she put a piece of leather on the block of wood that stopped her automotive engine. So she was really in essence, she was the person who invented the brake pad. And she came from the Mercedes family. So, yeah, I support the equal pay for women.
No to the living wage, it hurts. I don't understand. You have to have a place for people to come in. When I was a young kid and I went in and I got a job, I worked my way up the ladder. There are many jobs that should not be the jobs that you take to raise your family on. Once you say you're going to be $15 an hour, then they've got to lay people off. It's not, you lay people off, people don't, you have to raise the prices that you're charging, and it becomes much harder to either have the minimum wage or to say, yes, 100% to men and women should get, and I believe that is the law, they should be paid the exact same. I don't think that should be any consideration whatsoever. You get the same, you get the benefit of what you put in. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman, and yes, I would support any law that says that or a penalty for not doing it. The minimum wage is a problem, as I said, because what happens is the businesses, if you got $100 to pay in salary, you don't get $150, somebody gets laid off. And so many of these jobs are not meant for people to be raising their families on. The problem is government is involved in this. Get government out of your life. There's nothing whatsoever in the Constitution that says that the government should be involved in making those decisions. Article 1, Section 8 lays out very specifically what the government should be doing. Nothing in there with regards to those wages.
I believe that the minimum wage and living wage should be left up to local jurisdictions and states. That's the bottom line. That's what this is. We have a federal government. It's federal. You know, it's a collection of states. And if one state wants to, and look, we're going to have the experiment done. I mean, New York and California have raised the minimum wage to $15 an hour, the highest minimum wage across the country. And we're going to see what it does. Because there are conflicting, if you read the economic research on minimum wage, you get two conflicting stories. You get one is that it improves the conditions for those because minimum wage workers tend to be less educated and younger. And you have conflicting evidence, economic research evidence, that says that in fact you impair the ability of young uneducated people to enter the job force and then go up through the scale. So we're going to have the experiment in the United States. We're going to actually have a couple of states that have a very high, by comparison, it's almost twice as high as the federal minimum wage. And we're going to see what happens in those states. That's a good idea, because we will answer for once and for all the question is, does a minimum wage hurt or help those who you think you're targeting? With regards to equal pay, look, Delegate's right. The law's already on the books. We have the Equal Pay Act, we have the Lilly Ledbetter Act. The fact of the matter is, it's that the opportunity has not been the same. You know, the president's own West Wing office, when they calculated, the women got paid, on average, less than the men. But that's because the women didn't hold as high positions as the men, or for as long. So the answer is to give women the equal opportunity to obtain those positions, because the federal law already protects them. Once you get into that position, no one can discriminate you on wages, whether you're a man or a woman. So that's the answer, is make sure that we have other policies that allow women to get that opportunity to obtain those positions. Thank you.
When it comes to women and having equal pay, I'm all for it. My whole entire career has been involved in government jobs, from the state police to the Marine Corps. I even worked for a while at General Motors, the General Motors plant in Browning Highway in Baltimore. All those jobs had preset pay. I mean, wherever your level was, whatever your rank was a set pay. So it didn't matter whether you're female or male. That pay was set in stone. Yeah, so I'm all for females having the exact same pay as a male, and it should be that way. It's just in the private industry, I've never had to deal with that portion, but again, as the other candidates were saying, I would definitely like to see the females at the same pay as the male. In regards to minimum wage, I think we have to be very careful with that. We're walking a very fine line between what would be the acceptable minimum wage to allow people to raise families and stuff like that. But at the same time, if we make it too high, we're also going to shut down a lot of small businesses, because they can't afford to sustain that and pay $15 an hour for a small business to sustain that for their employees. Plus, like McDonald's, different industries like that, you're going to find that they might just go ahead and eliminate a lot of those positions and make them just standing kiosk machines. Order what you want on a kiosk machine, and then they'll eliminate jobs. So you're almost shooting yourself in the foot. But the one biggest thing to me is this. You got a Marine private right now with $9.41 an hour, if he only works a 40-hour work week. Anybody that did time in the service knows, as a private, you will never work a 40-hour work week. You're probably averaging 60 to 80. So if you're going to pay a Marine who's going to be over the age 18, 19, 20, who's going to risk his life to defend this country for $9.41, I'm sorry, someone at McDonald's should not be making more than that Marine.
Thank you. Do you support gun control legislation? One, to restrict the purchase of guns by people on the no-fly terror list, and two, by removing guns from those convicted of domestic abuse.
People on the no-fly list have consisted of Teddy Kennedy, children 5 years old. There is absolutely no due process. There's no constitutional method of determining who goes on. It's done by somebody in a back room in a secret way. Absolutely not. No, you don't take away constitutional rights from anyone. I'm 100% supportive of the Second Amendment and every constitutional right. I fought for your Fourth Amendment, your 10th Amendment, your First Amendment, and I'll fight for your Second Amendment rights. Absolutely not. There's no way you should be taking away these rights from anybody. If a person's engaged in domestic violence, then yes, they can lose the rights to have. The interesting thing is, if the husband or the wife use an instrument such as a bat or a knife, they don't take the bat or the knife, they come and take the gun. So I think that, yes, you should not, if you have a propensity toward violence already in Maryland, you can lose that right. And we already have laws that say if you're involved in any domestic violence, they take away the firearm. And one of the interesting things is when the bill came up in Maryland, the state police came in and actually wanted to say, wait, you have to exclude state police officers from this if they were domestic violence, because we'll lose too many state police officers or police officers. And we said, wait a minute, you're not going, and so they actually backed down when we stood up on the floor and said, no, anybody engaged in domestic violence should not have access to the firearm. And we were able to do that. So I do say there are ways that you lose that right, but I'm A+ from the NRA. I'm the leading Second Amendment supporter in this state for the last 12 years, and I will continue to fight for the Second Amendment rights of everybody.
Look, my position on Second Amendment rights is clear. I mean, I'm A-rated by the NRA, I'm endorsed by the NRA, and I don't say that in any way that, except that I'm proud of it in a way that, again, my parents came from communist countries where you didn't have the right to own a gun. And it was because the government was afraid of citizens having a gun. So I do believe that the Heller decision got it right, that owning a firearm is an individual right in this country, and it can only be removed by the government under very specific circumstances, each of which has to involve due process. Now here's the reason why I voted against saying that, someone on the government's, quote, no-fly list should not be restricted from owning a handgun, because they won't show you the no-fly list. In fact, there are several lists that are terrorist lists, only one of which is the no-fly list, and the way the legislation was worded, it was obscure as to which list it is. I don't know, because they're talking about it in the state here. I don't know how they're going to define it. There are close to 1 million people on the terrorist watch list, but there are only 80,000 or 90,000 on the no-fly list. But you don't know if you're put on. The government doesn't notify you. And they don't make it clear how you get taken off. I mean, that's how Teddy Kennedy got on the no-fly list. Bottom line. You can't do that. You can't take someone's right away without due process. Now, if they create a due process method, that would be all right. But they can't, because they want to keep the no-fly list fairly secret because they're investigating people on the no-fly list. So, this is a balance. This is a balance of rights versus, terrorist control. And I think we have to come down on the fact that due process is very, very, very important in this country. It's what separates us from totalitarian countries, is due process. You read about this all the time. People in China and Russia, they get hauled off to jail, no trial, no due process. Can't do it here in the United States. That's what separates us.
Okay. In regards to the no-fly zone or no-fly list, I don't agree with it. Individuals, again, as Mr. Smeagol was talking about, we have due process. When it comes to certain things like propensity to violence and domestic abuse, the Maryland State Police does take guns away from those individuals in a temporary process until they've had their time in court and they've had the case adjudicated to make a determination to take their right away from them if they've shown that they cannot be an individual to be trusted to have a firearm in their possession. So I agree with that. I am a big Second Amendment rights individual. Again, I don't have the backing of the NRA or any of them, but I can tell you right now that I believe that that is your right to have a firearm. Our forefathers back in the 1600s, they were extremely concerned back in those days of England and the king's rights and the taking away of the firearms from the individuals and the citizens. And again, you can see that almost in today. There's almost correlation that you got a tyrannical government that's attempting to disarm us, to keep us down and keep us unable to defend ourselves. So don't wait at home for someone to show up, law enforcement or the military, to protect you. Oftentimes you're going to take matters in your own hand first and then have the backup show up later on.
Well, what's the Constitution say? That the government cannot infringe upon our right to own a gun. And it should not, we should not have any government telling us we cannot own a gun. Let me tell you what's going on right now in Ukraine. The government took their guns away from them. And now they can't even protect themselves from Russia. We are the biggest army in the world, the American people. But yet the government doesn't want us to know that. We are the biggest army. And I am a very big Second Amendment person. It says infringe upon. And that, to me, I don't even think that we should be paying licensing fees for our guns. Because that's an infringement. And that's how I feel about the Second Amendment. And it's going to stay that way if I'm the Congress.
Thank you. Please comment on the military.
You know, I'm kind of glad we finally got around to foreign policy, because I think this is something that we live in a very dangerous world. Let me put it that way. This is a very, very dangerous world. And it has become more dangerous, not less dangerous, over the last decade. And I don't care whether you're talking about Russia, Eastern Europe, the Baltics, the Middle East, whether you're looking at ISIS controlling from Tunisia to Pakistan, whether you're looking at Iran obtaining nuclear, they're going to obtain a nuclear weapon, and they're just thumbing their nose at us in terms of developing ballistic missiles that can deliver it. You know, the Asia pivot, you know, we were supposed to have this reset with China and Russia, and China is building islands in the South China Sea. They're invading islands in the East China Sea. You look all around the world, it is a dangerous place. So our military, like it or not, the United States is viewed as the leader of the free world. And some people like it, some people don't. Isolationists don't. Neoconservatives, or whatever you want to call them, neocons, they like it. Whether we end up somewhere in the middle, we default to the people who, we are the nation that controls the peace in the world. And this has been true since World War II. It's the bottom line. We're very different from everyone else who had a powerful military, and that we're the only military that actually goes, wins a war, and then turns the country back over to the people and helps them rebuild. Everyone else occupies the country. Whether you look at Russia, whether you look at China, whether you look at what North Korea wants to do. I didn't mention North Korea. North Korea, 200 nuclear weapons with an ICBM device that can hit the continental United States. You can't allow it to happen, so two things you need in the military budget. First thing you need to do is make sure that our nuclear arsenal is modernized, that we have an anti-ballistic missile defense, that we can defend against incoming missiles from rogue nations like North Korea and Iran. And the third thing you do is restore our military capability. We need 15 carrier groups in the Navy, not 11. The President proposed to bring it down to 9. We can't do it. Our military is overstressed. It's going to be hard. They're overstretched. It's hard to get people to come into the military. We need to restore the military power to keep the peace, not to go to war. Because the U.S. doesn't have military to go to war. It has the military to keep the peace. Thank you.
Basically, Andy has said a lot of good stuff in regards to having a strong army. Right now, our government pays 18% towards our national defense. 18 cents for every dollar that is brought in is put towards national defense, where 20%, 20 cents of every dollar is basically put towards welfare. We need to build up a stronger military, but what we need to do is have the best of equipment for them, but we also need to increase their pay, which would encourage a lot more people to join the military, so we do have a strong military force. By having a strong military force, we will be a strong leader within the world. But with the leadership, that's the huge part with our government personnel, that we can't just keep selling ourselves out and selling themselves out to different deals with the Iran deal. the nuclear deal. So we need to have a stronger setting and have personnel in place with some conviction and be able to stand behind the what we stand for, so when we say that we're going to invade or we need to have you stand down on one of your actions, we will take the necessary and appropriate force to do so.
Of course we need a strong military. I think we're pretty bad as it is right now. But, and why hasn't other countries invaded America in all these years? Because they're afraid of us. And we need to keep them afraid of us. We need a strong military. But then on the other hand, think about this. This is what I did. I called John McCain's office. And then I called the Senate Arms Committee. And I wanted to know one question. Why can we shut down a pickup truck or a car in our backyards, but we can't shut down a $10 million tank when it falls into the wrong hands? Where's the common sense? Now, you know, spending in our defense has got to have common sense. And right now, the way some of these defense contractors are just spending the money, it's some of these stories that I'm hearing, it's ridiculous. But you just need common sense, and you need to spend it wisely. But we do need to modernize, because believe me, China and Russia, they got their eyes on us, and so's North Korea. So we got to make sure we keep them in check. I had 2 colonels in my family. I have pilots in my family. My whole family was military. Believe me, I know more about the military than most of these guys up here. Okay? And I've heard all the stories. I got a sword at home from the surrender. My great uncle was at the surrender, standing next to General MacArthur when Japan surrendered to America. He was in Pearl Harbor when it was bombed. And that's what I had to hear my whole life, how bad the Japanese were, from my great aunt. So, yes, we do need to spend money on our military, but we got to spend it wisely.
I think 3 of us up here are veterans, and we'll tell you that the #1 thing that we need to make sure is that if we're ever in a position that we have to send our sons and daughters into harm's way, we want to make sure that they have the very best of equipment and technology that's available anywhere in the world, that we make sure that we honor their service by not abandoning them when they're on the battlefield or when they come home, and to make sure that they have the ability to get the medical care that they need, and they are not stuck in some system that leaves them waiting to get to see a doctor until they either die from the wounds that they have or they take their own life, which is happening all too often. So I do think that we have to modernize our military to make sure that America projects the image of strength. We do not have to be the policemen of the world, but we do need to let others know that there are repercussions and that we can back those words up if we have to say we've drawn a line in the sand and make it mean something. Right now, our Navy is in atrocious shape. We need hundreds of ships. As the Congressman had said, we need to rebuild the Navy. We need to add additional forces to our Air Force, and we need to make sure that we modernize and have the technology out there and available to make sure that our men and women are as safe as any way they could possibly be if we're going to set them into harm's way. So,
Thank you.
it also helps with the economy, you know, to be building and put them back to work, and that's something that we can do, is to give those arms to our allies overseas who are our allies, who need them, and it helps.
With you. I think the contrast was already made, because what I can say to your viewers is what you heard up here today, even from the moderate fringe all the way to the fringe does not apply to me, and I don't agree with it. You sit out in the audience and you try and find ways. Americans want people to work together. They want people to go to Washington and work together. So I hoped and prayed as I was taking my notes that I would be able to find some things from each one of these people that would allow me to say, hey, you know what, I agree with this here. It was difficult. There was a pivot at one point. One of them started talking about personal responsibility. I think we have to have more of that in our country. talked about safe schools, talked about grandkids. I mean, all of those things are great, but even the statistics that you heard today were incredibly wrong. Everything today was blamed on Obama, the Chinese, and the Japanese. It was, we'll be for equal pay for women, but not for a minimum wage increase. I'm running for 3 reasons. One is the preservation of the family farm and the health of the Chesapeake Bay. I think that actually was one of the places where, I mean, if you could say we ran a little bit close to one another. We do have to solve the problem here. We do have to solve the problem with the dam, and what we have to do is figure out how to help our farmers deal with the chicken litter, create energy, create electricity, and then we've got to sell it somehow in mass up in Pennsylvania, where 78% of the pollution from in the bay is coming. We didn't hear anything about heroin addiction today, and that is one of the main reasons. 28 people in Hartford County, 130 overdoses last year. Wycomico County putting together a huge bipartisan effort with the state's attorney, the sheriff, the mayor, the police chief, to begin to address it. But you didn't hear anything about them, about Jeannie Shaheen's bill from New Hampshire. You didn't hear anything about the $600 million that was stripped out of it. You didn't hear anything about veterans and veteran housing that was cut by the Republicans on the House of Representatives the other day. I applaud them. They are Americans. They love their country. They think that something is fundamentally wrong. They are scared of their government. I believe we should be scared of them. Very simply. I mean, in all, what you hear is blame. What you hear is it's this group's fault. It's this country's fault. It's that country's fault. You hear nothing about everybody wants a strong military. Everybody wants a budget that's balanced. When they ask them what you've done to create business, not a one answer. Mr. Harris pivoted to farms. I can tell you that I cut equivalent dwelling unit costs from the second highest on the Delmarva Peninsula to the second lowest on the Delmarva Peninsula. Salisbury has grown by 33% between 2000 and 2010. And it's continuing that growth. That means there have to be jobs there for people to do. But what the real issue is are we going to become a service economy, a complete service economy in our country, and whether or not we are going to manufacture and make things again. I believe that you spread democracy by spreading American products across the globe. But what happens in our country is that we pay Chinese workers $13,000 a year to do it, and we wonder why we breed contempt from people around the world, because these trade agreements are not for the spread of democratization. They're for profit, and for profit only. Andy Harris is a fine gentleman. He loves his country. But he has these other people up here with him because his party has perpetuated these things that you hear, that everybody's out to get you, that everything is a conspiracy theory.
So abortion, that
Legal, accessible, and rare.
immigration,
Path to citizenship that doesn't destroy families.
Chesapeake Bay,
Solve the problem of the family farm, and you solve the problem of a sustainable Chesapeake Bay.
gun control,
33,000 gun deaths in the United States. 2/3 of them are suicides. Mental health. Decriminalization of marijuana will bring down gun deaths. I'm not for taking them away from farmers and sportsmen, because our side believes we will stop urban violence by doing that. We don't need more gun laws. We need to take the people that are on the terrorist watch list. We need to make sure they can't get them, and we need to address the issues of mental health, of domestic violence, because that's where those things are happening.
who are you supporting for president,
Nobody.
and military budget.
Military budget has to be tweaked to represent this century instead of the last century or the century before that. We can solve the 1 in 5 hungry children with taking one military project out that is not relevant to today's issues that we have across the globe. It's just that simple. I think the only way the military gets done the right way and we spend the amount of money that we should be spending is if we make it less of a political process where this person lives in this district, where this is, and if those districts and those facilities are not relevant to today's protection of the American people, then they've got to go. But nobody wants to say that because there are powerful people who have very big military installations in their districts. But again, I would say to you is that when you vote against the Violence Against Women Act and you vote against hurricane relief for Crisfield and you vote against the Farm Act because you don't like SNAP benefits, you're not doing anything for these people who live here. So, but I think it was important that we heard exactly where the far right is and where the very, very far right